Welcome to Talaterra, a podcast about freelance educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. Who are these educators? What do they do? Join me, and let's find out together. This is your host, Tania Marien. Today, my guest is Darrel Griffin. Darrel is a LinkedIn strategist who helps business owners and freelance professionals attract new clients. I had the opportunity to learn from Darrel last year and reached out to him to see if he had time to discuss how freelance environmental educators can use LinkedIn during this time. We had a wonderful conversation, so get your pen and paper ready. Well, Darrel, thank you so much for stopping by today to talk about LinkedIn and how freelance environmental educators can use LinkedIn, use the platform to connect with new partners and with each other as well. You are a LinkedIn strategist. If you can explain what that means, please.
Okay, Tania, well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me onto your podcast. It's a privilege. I am a LinkedIn strategist. Okay, well, let me, first of all, explain that LinkedIn is just a tool. Okay, so being a strategist with a tool is a little bit like being a piano teacher, I guess. One might buy a piano, but that doesn't make one a pianist. So I would argue that being a LinkedIn strategist helps people use the LinkedIn tool to better strategize for their desired business outcomes. Sounds a bit grand, but that's about what it is.
I shared with you some information about the current state of the field of environmental education. Just for listeners' sake, let me explain where we're at in our conversation. In April, the Lawrence Hall of Science surveyed organizations in the field to assess how COVID-19 was impacting environmental education and outdoor science programs. A total of 995 organizations responded to the survey, and it was determined through the survey that if social distancing continues through December of this year, that only about 22% of the organizations surveyed feel that they are certain to reopen. What was also determined through the survey, in addition to the huge loss of revenue and jobs, was that it's estimated that 11 million learners will have missed out on environmental education learning opportunities if organizations are not able to reopen before the end of the year. The survey addressed the current state of organizations. It did not address the state of independent professionals working in the field. I've been speaking with independent professionals over the past month or two, actually a couple months. These professionals are people who are in the early stages of their career and who have many years of experience working as a freelancer in the field. And regardless of where they are in the journey, they are equally concerned about funding and cash flow, being asked to work for free, finding new projects, new partners, and new clients as well. I have many, many questions about LinkedIn, but I think I've got it down to one question to start off our conversation, which is, how should freelance environmental educators be thinking about LinkedIn at this time?
Okay, that sounds like a little question, but it's actually a very big one. It's a little bit like anyone who is self-employed or as a freelancer. Essentially, you're a self-employed person. To a point, you have to do your own marketing and business development. It's the challenge for us all who have decided to take a slightly different route to the conventional one, which might be employment. But essentially, we need to think of a tool like LinkedIn as a shop window into our expertise. So we can unpack some of that. But essentially what I encourage all of my clients to do is understand that a lot of my clients are essentially freelancers. They might have the label of being business owner or, self-employed or whatever it may be. But essentially they are responsible for creating their own income, their own clients, their own opportunities. And so I'm working with these kind of people all the time. So the starting point is always, what is the desired outcome? Okay. What do I want as a result of putting effort and energy into something? So we start with the desired outcome, and that may be, for example, more clients. That's typically the situation for the people that I work with. I need more clients. My business is, I've had referrals in the past. I've had website inquiries in the past. I have a close-knit network of people that have provided me with opportunities in the past, but that's all drying up because of the situation, partly because of the situation we're in, and partly because we can be a little bit short-sighted and, let's say, we stay within our comfort zone. Okay. That's not a criticism. Sometimes it's the logical thing to do. We've got enough business from the situation that we find ourselves in. But when things change, we need to then start to think a little bit more like a business development manager for ourselves and consider our desired outcome and then reverse engineer from there. So instead of starting from where I am now, we start from where I want to be, and then we create a strategy with that end goal in mind. I hope I'm making sense to everyone.
Yes, you are. It's very clear.
Good.
Okay, so my next question is then, how should EE professionals present themselves on LinkedIn? What isn't worth putting out there and what is?
Okay. Well, let's then return to this reverse engineered kind of approach. There are several stages to this. And what we have to consider, this has actually been true for some time. It's probably exaggerated or enhanced because of the virus situation. But for a long time now, statistically, people have been using digital tools as part of their due diligence process. So, for example, I have clients working with me now. I have one particular client working with me that has been following me online for almost 2 years. And it goes to show that this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been around for some time. So if I go back to the beginning of what I would call my quote unquote aggressive digital journey, sounds a bit poncy, but essentially, if I go back to 2012, 2013, I understood back then that people were beginning to use tools like LinkedIn to research me before being prepared to contact me in what we would call the traditional ways, i.e. picking up the telephone or dropping me an email. They were researching me to discover whether I was a suitable candidate for their project. Now, I was employed then, but I understood that if I could position myself, and there's that word position, if I could position myself for the people whom would be interested in my services, then that would be a far better approach to a tool like LinkedIn than just putting up my resume, for example. If I was looking for a new job, which I wasn't, then I would go the resume route. But actually, what I wanted people to do, and still want people to do, is to choose me. It's essentially what I'm seeking to do, and so what I'm seeking to do, for example, first of all, from the way that I present myself on LinkedIn, and let's start with the profile. I'm seeking to present myself as a subject matter expert for the people that might hire me. So I'm quite niche, even though I work in the marketing space. I only work with values-led business people. So I've actually cut off. I know that's some people might argue, well, everybody's values-led, but you'd be surprised. A lot of people are actually purely dollars and cents led. So I have deliberately distanced myself to probably 90% of the market purely by choosing a niche. I can unpack some of that, but when I get back to the whole positioning thing, it is like a shop window. So what I'm doing, or what we all need to do, is understand like that our profile, and it's not just our profile, but we'll start with the profile. Profile is the starting point. We have to understand who it is. I'll use my doctor analogy because that's probably the best way to do it in terms of positioning yourself on LinkedIn. So you take your profile, you imagine yourself to be a specialist doctor or surgeon or whatever term you wish to use. You need to ask yourself, who is the patient? Who do I serve? Who is the person at the other end of this transaction, if you like? What pain are they in that I can solve? What is my prescription for the pain? How am I going to treat the pain? And what is the prognosis for working with me? And that kind of applies to any business, really. What we're trying to avoid doing is the situation where I go into the doctor's office and sit down, and he or she immediately prescribes something without knowing what's wrong with me. There's no bedside manner. It's purely prescriptive. What that looks like in practical terms is probably easy to look at a profile like mine and see the way that I do it. But essentially the mistake most people are making, even in roles like sales, where you'd have thought that they would be wanting to be very customer focused, they're still very self-focused. So I've done this, I've done that, I have this, I've hit quota. So if you're a customer reading that, you're scared off, So if you're a freelancer, you need to be positioning yourself for the people that you serve and explaining to them in the best way you can why you are going to be of value to those people. This is essentially what positioning is all about. You're positioning yourself for the people you serve and not for yourself. And it's a little bit of a shift it's a bit of a mindset shift, because we're very used to thinking, okay, I need to do a profile, I need to explain everything that I do. Well, actually, no, the ideal situation is we take ourselves out of our own shoes. We put them in the shoes of a potential client and say, well, what are they looking for? And what are the challenges they're facing that I can solve? That's typically the approach. How that applies directly to your industry or sector, then we can unpack some of that more if you like.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Yeah, so it's knowing who you're for and speaking only to them through your profile.
Yes.
Yes.
And actually having the courage, even in these difficult times, to be as niche and specific as you can. Sorry, it's niche in the US, isn't it? Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Niche away, folks. Yeah, try to niche. Having the courage to position yourself just for, having the courage to be as narrow as possible, not as broad as possible, even though every instinct inside of us goes, no, I just need to try and capture everything as wide as possible. You don't. There'll be a large enough market for the niche, if you can articulate it properly. And that's part of the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. The report from the Lawrence Hall of Science was about organizations and not about the independent professionals in the field. And so, but my feeling is that the independent professionals in the field can fill some of the voids in their communities because they're more agile. They can react faster or better to the immediate needs of their communities. For example, maybe through homeschooling, or especially through this pandemic pod concept where neighbors, are hiring teachers or guest instructors or something. Yeah, I'm thinking about them as an example of what a profile might look like when you are dealing with prospective community partners who are some are very used to looking at LinkedIn profiles, and some maybe don't look at LinkedIn profiles because they are parents hiring teachers for their children.
So then we have to understand, okay, so let's think first of all about the advantage you have as a freelancer or as an independent person. You are a speedboat compared to a cargo ship. The speed which you can turn your ability to react and so on is so much quicker. You've got to play to your advantages and your strengths. You actually, the advantage of the internet is it kind of levels the ground. It levels the playing field. I can now compete with larger businesses purely on the level of service, the value I can provide, the way that I can respond far more quickly. So that is one aspect to consider, to look at it positively. Just a slight segue. I have found in this work that I've been doing for 6.5 years or so now, is that a lot of people are reactive. And this touches on something I've already said. And few people are proactive. So what happens is that we can become very afraid, and because we have found security in the way things were, we essentially, what we've done, this is the typical scenario of people that I've worked in the past. So some people are freelancers or self-employed because they are entrepreneurial, and some people are freelancers and business owners because that's just the way it's turned out. Okay. The problem with the just the way it's turned out kind of scenario is that we tend to approach being a freelancer or self-employed a little bit like being employed, right? So we've kind of just sort of like, okay, that little pot of money is there, so I'm going to access that as a freelancer rather than as an employed person because that opportunity has arisen. I understand that, but the challenge is what happens if that pot of money is taken away. I revert to the way that I've always done business, which is kind of reactive. I've kind of like, I've been born, I've gone to school, I've gone to university, I've got the piece of paper, and I've got into the career, and I kind of, as long as there isn't a crisis, I'm okay. But when there is a crisis, It's outside of my frame of reference, so it becomes challenging. What I'm encouraging people to do is, okay, how can I now acknowledge this, but how can I now proactively take charge and start to make things happening for myself rather than waiting for things to happen to me? And now I've gone so far off track that I've forgotten where I come from. So
no, you haven't gone off track, because what I'm hearing you say is that you need to know who you're for, present
yeah,
yourself accordingly, and
yeah,
then learn to pick yourself instead of waiting to be picked, to borrow Seth Godin's
that
expression.
is
Yeah.
exactly right. And how that, this is why you can use LinkedIn as a reactive person or a proactive person. And this is why I stressed right at the very beginning that it's just a tool. It actually does very little for you if you don't understand why, your why. Actually, why are you using it? Why, this is why it's important to try and unpack that. And you're right, a lot of mums and dads may not be using LinkedIn. A lot of them will, because they are professional people. So LinkedIn will have its limits. It's about understanding. I've got to be crystal clear on who the patient is. If I use the doctor now, who is the patient? If it is mums and dads, then it may be that they are not overly active on LinkedIn. They don't present themselves as mums and dads on LinkedIn in the same way as they might do on Facebook, for example. So LinkedIn has its place. I think to a point, Facebook, I'm not a huge fan of Facebook, nor a huge user of it. So I'm not one that can particularly comment on that. However, inevitably would be mums and dads groups on LinkedIn, on Facebook. And so I think from a LinkedIn perspective, I would be wanting to know, what I try and do is I try and think of myself, if I was representing the listener as their business development manager, if they were ultimately paying me to get them more customers, how would I use LinkedIn to do that? Well, first of all, I'd have to get my positioning right. I'd have to know what we've already discussed. I'd have to know who the patient is, and the pain and the prescription and the prognosis, so that I could present myself to the world as this subject matter expert for this specific niche, right? Then what do I do? Well, of course, that is just the foundation, really, of any, if we think that we can just put up a profile and we will get leads and opportunities on autopilot, I'm afraid that's the thing of fairy tales. It doesn't work like that. Positioning right, understanding who we serve, why they need us, and how specifically we benefit people is the key, not only to the way we position ourselves in our profiles, but also the way that we communicate. So probably the most important thing about LinkedIn is the way that we communicate with people. It is a communication tool, ultimately. It is probably the closest thing to the digital business networking tool, really. But of course, this isn't, I don't sign up to LinkedIn, put up a profile, post some stuff, and then voila. It doesn't work like that. And I'm afraid there is no silver bullet. And I get it. I get it most days. Most people that would inquire, businesses say, okay, things are drying up. We need more clients. What fairy dust can you sprinkle on our business to make us suddenly a client magnet? Well, it doesn't work quite like that, because we're dealing with human beings. Human beings are not predictable. this is a trust issue, not a transaction issue, ultimately. So what I'm seeking to do, that just rounding this up, what I'm seeking to do is position myself as a trustworthy human being, fundamentally. Okay. I'm trying to communicate the best way I can how I can help you. And then my profile, my content, which we might touch on, but also the way that I engage with other people on what is essentially a networking platform is part of it. But there's also the other, probably the scariest side of it, is the fact that LinkedIn is a huge database of potential customers, right? So what do I do with that? It's a huge tool, but it is just a tool. So what we have to get into our heads is that the tool facilitates rather than does for us. If that makes sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. Okay, so a profile is only the starting point.
It is.
And it should be created for who you're for and who you're speaking with intentionally. Communication, then, this is a good point. The posts and the comments and all that comes next, and that is how you develop a rapport, just like you would in person, and how you establish trust with other people. In the co-working space, I was asking what they would like to know about LinkedIn at this time. One question is posts versus articles. Is there a difference? Does it matter?
John, there's a huge amount of post options now. So let's start with posts. Text-only posts, graphics, video, slide decks, which are multi-page PDFs now, which is my preference. The algorithm seems to favor one, then favors another, then favors, and just keeps people guessing all the time. Articles have been a little bit out of favor for a while, and I don't think that will. When articles first appeared, I think probably about 5 years ago, the algorithm really favored them. So people were just writing articles. And one particular guy I know who had a huge backlog of blog articles was literally posting an article every day, just from his archive of content, and getting a huge amount of traction as a result. Well, that changed probably 3 years ago, and those people disappear again. The circus is in town on one form of content for a while, and then the circus leaves, and with it the clowns and the trapeze artists. So my preference currently is posts. However, we can talk about strategy here. For example, if you have a blog, and if you like writing and you have a blog, then I approach it this way, a little bit like if you're releasing a movie, you also have to release a trailer, right? You don't just put the movie out there and hope that people are going to watch it. You have a trailer and you put it. So I would argue that you write your long form content on your blog and then create a trailer for it on LinkedIn. Now, if we were having this conversation 2 months ago, I wouldn't have said do this, because it seemed that the algorithm was against any links that took people away from LinkedIn. But that doesn't seem to be the case currently, as of August 2020, that we can do posts with links which take people away from LinkedIn, and it doesn't seem to be penalizing that strategy. What you've got to understand is that LinkedIn wants people engaging on the platform and not being taken away from the platform. So in the past, it has If you posted something with a link to your blog, then it tended to put the brakes on that particular post, and you'd get about a tenth of the reach that you got before. The best content, I think, is the slide deck multi-page PDF content. However, that's not going to help beginners unless you are, if you're an experienced, you've got some design experience and you create your own PDFs easily. The best place to start is with the text-only posts, I think. You've got up to 1,300 characters for a text-only post. You might want to use up to 3 hashtags, which was a subject in itself. And you can tag people in your network if it is relevant to them. Don't do it otherwise. To encourage them to perhaps add their perspective in the comments or whatever. I tend to approach LinkedIn, the newsfeed, as a snack site. So I want to give you a taste of my expertise rather than the full meal, as it were. And so I've tried all kinds of strategies and approaches. Fundamentally, if you're providing value to people, then that's the key to it, really. Understanding that the vast majority of people on LinkedIn aren't necessarily going to be ready to hire you. What you're essentially trying to do is conceive trust with people so that when they are ready to hire somebody like you, they pick you and not somebody else. You want to become the subject matter expert. Because you probably are already, dear listener. You know your subject. You know it well. What you're essentially doing is that you're putting your parts of your knowledge and expertise out there so people can see that you are this expert, and so that you become top of mind in there. That's the game. If you want to turn it into a game, that's the game.
That's excellent. Excellent advice, and a very good perspective, and a healthy perspective, instead of chasing down numbers and connections and things you don't know why you're doing it.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because if I go back a few years, I get people ask me every day, not every day, but quite often, say, okay, I need to press the button which is results. And I said to them, well, you're not going to like what I'm going to tell you. They say, well, you seem to be doing okay. You're getting all this engagement on your posts. And I said, yeah, but you've not walked with me for the last 5 years. All the groundwork, all of the foundation building, it takes time. And so people say, so how quickly can I generate leads with LinkedIn? I said, well, how quickly can you generate trust with people? Probably not overnight, And that assumes that the actual strategy you're implementing is a good one. A lot of people that are just chasing shadows, really, have got to position themselves completely off. They're off target with their positioning. Their content is really salesy and me. They don't engage with anybody else's content to build rapport and the like, and then they wonder why the outcome is, well, why isn't this tool isn't working for me? Well, actually, it's because your strategy is all wrong, and but they don't want to hear it. Okay. They don't want to hear it because they don't even want to conceive of the idea that they might be doing it wrong. It's somebody else's fault. And that's when I can't work with people like that. It's, but yes, if it's done well and with proper planning, then the outcomes are very realistically achievable, but it is a long game. This is why advertising will continue to be an option because people don't want to play the long game. They think that if I put enough money on Facebook ads that I'm going to get the outcomes that I want. Well, increasingly, that's not true either, because we live in a Netflix age, for want of a better description, where we have opted out of being advertised at. So, and this applies to content as well. If our content is very advertising in style, then the phone, this used to be a phone, it's now a device where I can choose to ignore you.
Mm-hmm.
The swipe of a finger. So the skill is, how can I become a trusted resource, a trusted expert, someone who provides such huge value that people cannot help but remember me when they need my expertise, when they need, so for me, when they need to get their marketing right, or their positioning right, or their content right, or whatever it is, I want them to think of me and not some inferior source. So it's the same for everybody. It's the same for everybody. The challenge is understanding where LinkedIn fits in the bigger picture. And that's a big subject. I encourage people to look up something like Schwartz. There's a guy called Schwartz, Schwartz, Schwartz stages of awareness.
Okay.
If people want to dive into a bit of the technical stuff, that it basically explains that though most of the time we think that people are ready to hire us or buy from us, they're not. The vast majority of the time, they may not even be aware of us, or aware that they need us, or aware that we might be able to solve something, that a challenge they might have, or whatever. That's the skill of positioning and content and so on. So it's fascinating for those people who are fascinated by it.
Yeah.
Less so, but back to the rub. How can I, from the situation that I'm in now, use LinkedIn effectively to change the game for me? Well, I'm going to have to be honest and say that's easier said than done in a short window. But actually, and let's be honest, some of us, let's be realistic. We might need things to change in the next month, for example. I don't think LinkedIn is necessarily going to be that quick for people. In some situations, it's going to need to be a little bit more dramatic, I guess, in some.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because it is as you said, the long game with LinkedIn. If you need faster results, change things faster, you might not be a good option for you.
It doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't happen. I mean, in my experience, I've had people contact me who've I remember the very early days when I was on LinkedIn as an employed person, as a business development manager in the sign manufacturing industry, and I just managed to connect with people at the right time. As it just so happens we're working on such and such project, and we need somebody like you. Sometimes it's just in the timing, but in my experience, on the whole, it's a long game.
Yeah. Okay. And so another quick question that came up is, since we're talking about sales and the perception of having large sales, a question came in about the LinkedIn sales analysis. I've heard is good for focusing on business and organizations. It's a paid product of selective database of businesses in LinkedIn. What does that refer to?
I think probably it's Sales Navigator that person is probably referring to. I could be wrong, but my hunch is that they're referring to Sales Navigator, which is basically a standalone tool. So if you want to pay for LinkedIn Premium, you've got various options. One of them is Sales Navigator, which gives you an exhaustive search database of everybody pretty much on LinkedIn, with the view of what? Well, why it's called Sales Navigator is because it appeals to the salespeople that don't want to, then really not concerned about positioning themselves particularly well. They're not concerned about doing content. They're not concerned about building rapport and relationships with people. They want to cut to the chase and start selling. Well, I don't think that works anymore, right? I think that we are very, very resistant to such strategies. So Sales Navigator is I've got Sales Navigator because I need to have it, because some of my clients use it, but I don't use it hardly at all for any kind of personal use, unless I want to specifically look for a particular individual in a company of a certain size with a certain number of employees and all the, minutiae of detail. The other challenge is if you're, for example, Tania, you've got 210 connections, right? That's going to limit your LinkedIn search to a certain size, because LinkedIn search within the free version of LinkedIn or within business premium LinkedIn is restricted to your first connections and your second connections. So people you're directly connected to and people who are connected to people you're directly connected to. You can't search beyond that kind of framework. So Sales Navigator gets beyond that framework and allows you to search right out there.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, what I want to say is that Sales Navigator, none of these things are going to give you a leg up, right? LinkedIn Premium won't give you a leg up. If you pay for LinkedIn, you don't have an advantage over somebody that doesn't pay for LinkedIn, because it's like me. I'll use the piano analogy again. I can't play piano for toffee. We've got a piano here. My wife plays, and my son's been learning, and he's very good. But I'm not, right? So we've got a couple of $100 piano sat there, hand-me-down piano. If we change that piano to a Steinway Grand, it would make no difference to my ability to play, right? I might be more inclined to want to play as a result of that, but it's just a more expensive piano. And Sales Navigator is just a more expensive LinkedIn. If I don't know how to play the blooming thing,
yeah,
I'm just spending money on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Darrel. Thank you so much for your insights and for really putting LinkedIn in a different perspective, a different light, and help us think about how to think about it. Where can people find you online, and how can they continue to learn from you?
Yeah, I do want to say that, and I touched upon it. In my 53 years, I don't want to get all kind of melancholic or anything here, but I've been through bankruptcy. I was bankrupt at the age of 25. I know what it is to struggle. I don't have a safety. I don't have rich parents to fall back on or anything like that. I've been through severe burnout and some fairly dark times with depression. I know my stuff, but I'm as human as everybody else. And I just want to empathize with anyone who's scared right now, because it is tough. And, I wish I could, I genuinely do. And I've got clients now who I'm doing my best to help, but there's only so much I can do. I don't have all the answers. I can counsel people how to do this stuff well, that can benefit them in the long term, but I don't have a magic wand. What I do have, though, and I'm quite happy for you to share my email address with your listeners, I do have a fairly extensive handbook. It's 50 pages of notes, LinkedIn, about profiles, about content, about digital networking, about LinkedIn search and how you might find people to follow and so on, all this kind of information. I'd be very happy to send that to anyone that gets in touch with me, if that's going to help them to implement a strategy at this time. So please do that. You can find me very easily on LinkedIn, but my name is spelt Darrel. And you'll find me on, I've got a website and stuff, but LinkedIn, we're talking LinkedIn, easy to find me on LinkedIn. And like I say, I do have a mailing list as well. And what I do essentially with my mailing list, I have Darrel's Friday Digest, which is a once a week, a summary. It's my top 3 posts for the week in one digest, essentially, so that people don't have to rely on the algorithm to get all of my content. So there's those couple of things. If you wanted to share my email address with your listenership, I'm more than happy to send the handbook, and if they wanted to follow my content, I'll also give them the link for that, my Darrel's Friday Digest, and they can follow along to their heart's content.
Oh, thank you, Darrel. That's very generous. I want to thank Darrel for his time, his generosity, and valuable insights into how environmental educators can use LinkedIn. To learn more about Darrel and to request a copy of the LinkedIn Handbook, visit the show notes for this episode. In the show notes, you will also find a link to the transcript. So if you missed anything that Darrel said during our conversation, you will be able to find those comments there. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time. Talaterra is a podcast for and about independent educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Tania Marien.